You know we fit better than she ever could. Don't you see it, Thomas? Once we stand together, everyone will notice. She'll fade behind us like decor.
I kept my jaw steady. By the end, the truth would land. Fluorescent lights flickered and the mantel clock tapped once behind me. Lila's dress was the kind of white you reserve for a bride. She smoothed his tie like it belonged to her hands. I watched her reflection in the dark fellowship hall window, closer in glass than in the room itself. Thomas stared at the program and pretended the print needed studying. The air vent whirred above the stacked chairs, lifting the corner of a ribboned centerpiece. I folded my rehearsal card and slid it into my program. Her handwriting was all loops and confidence, that same looping hand from years of birthday notes. A soft vibration moved against my jacket. My phone screen blinked awake, a message preview flashing his name with a line I didn't want to read. I didn't open it. I let the preview collapse and the screen go dark again. Fellowship hall lights hummed over the folding tables. I placed the program flat and smoothed the paper until it stopped curling. If the phone blinks again, the truth will show itself. My breath hitched once, then leveled. Friday at 7 will test more than flowers and music. The venue coordinator pinned another ribbon to a bouquet and stepped aside. Run-through starts in 5, she said, cheerful and brisk. Lila lifted her clutch and laughed at something only she heard. When she tilted it toward the light, I saw a second phone tucked along the lining screen down case, glittering like a secret. I put that image away like a pin, small and sharp, meant for later. Thomas cleared his throat. We should go over hymns, he said, eyes still on paper. I nodded, and the nod felt like a placeholder rather than agreement. I could smell coffee warming in the church kitchen, that dependable percolator breath that kept volunteers moving. Somewhere behind us, the pastor's wife counted centerpieces under her breath, lips moving without sound. Lila practiced gliding down the center aisle, a silvered figure against the pews. I love how this light falls, she said to no one in particular. I kept my voice even. It shows what needs showing. She smiled like I had paid her an unearned compliment. The coordinator handed me a small stack of escort cards to check. Lila watched my hands. Let me help, she said, already reaching. You're nervous. Let me carry the little things. I set the stack down and turned a card toward me, tracing the inked names. I can carry what is mine, I said, and it sounded simple enough to live by. My phone trembled again. A second preview flashed and vanished, same name, a newer timestamp. The screen stayed dark, but the room shifted an inch toward stillness. I thought about how dates don't wobble the way voices do. Times sit where you place them and wait until someone reads them aloud. Evelyn, Thomas said softly, as if distance might help. Let's not make a thing out of nothing. He had always been generous with reasons for other people. I had learned to admire that generosity from a safe distance. The pastor's wife came over with a roll of tape. Table numbers are straight, she said. Her eyes met mine for a heartbeat longer than needed, a quiet check-in we both understood. Thank you, I said. Could you help me hold the room tomorrow? She nodded once, as if we had agreed weeks ago. Lila's laughter tinkled against the fluorescent buzz. Stand here, Thomas, she said, placing him where the aisle widened near the front row. Better light for the photos. Her hand hovered near his shoulder like she was arranging more than angles. I walked to the window and watched the rain press a slow gloss across the porch rail. The drip found the loose nail, clicking a patient metronome. My reflection looked older than I felt, but it looked steady. In that reflection, Lila and Thomas were smaller, as if the glass had learned scale where they hadn't. The coordinator clapped once. Positions for rehearsal. People moved chairs, breathed, paper rustled. I stepped beside Thomas and took the program from his hands. I'll keep this, I said. He let go. Evelyn, Lila said, trying concern on like a shawl. Are you overwhelmed? It's a lot to manage. I kept my tone calm. Details are friendlier when they're honest. She blinked, then smiled too brightly. We walked the aisle. I took measured steps, counting the seam lines in the carpet, 3 heartbeats between each. At the front, I faced the pews and let my gaze settle where the notary's number sat inked beneath my neighbor's name on the inside cover of the rehearsal card. I had written it months ago because paper remembers for me when my patience runs thin. No witness, no sign. The coordinator ran us again. The air smelled faintly of Lysol down the side hallway, a clean insistence that covered older church wood. When the cycle ended, people scattered for water and coffee and small talk. I set my phone on the table as if it were any other object, a napkin or a salt shaker. It vibrated once more and then lay still, a small machine refusing to lie for anyone. Thomas approached, careful not to touch my sleeve. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm focused," I answered, and the words belonged to me. He looked toward the kitchen, then back to me. "Lila's only trying to help." I nodded. "She's very helpful when she wants the spotlight." "I think you're reading into things," he said. "I think I'm reading what's in front of me," I said. He opened his mouth, closed it, and studied the order of service like it might volunteer an exit line. The pastor's wife returned with small cups of water. "Everyone good for a quick blessing before we wrap?" she asked, her voice warm and settled. People drifted into a semicircle, polite and ready to be done. I took my place, lifted my chin, and let the mantel clock's ticking mark the pause. The pastor's wife prayed for kindness, memory, and right timing. I said amen with everyone else and meant every syllable. After, Lila brushed my arm with 2 fingertips. "Get rest," she said, like a command wrapped in care. "Tomorrow will be beautiful." I gave her a small smile that could be heard differently by different people. "Tomorrow will be clear," I said. She tilted her head, decoding. The chairs sighed as they folded, the air vent quieted, and the percolator settled into a slow, satisfied breath. I gathered the program, the rehearsal card, and my bag. The second phone glinted once more inside Lila's clutch when she reached for her keys. I tucked that glint beside the timestamps already waiting on my screen. "Before the vows," I said, voice low enough for the glass to remember, "we'll speak plainly." Outside, the porch rain deepened and washed the steps clean for morning. By morning, the church smelled like rain and coffee, a steadier combination today. I woke early, folded linens, and reviewed the rehearsal card again before breakfast. Her looping handwriting looked cheerful even where assignments favored her own aisle placements. I had met Thomas volunteering stacking canned goods at the pantry one winter. He listened kindly but often avoided decisions until someone else stepped first instead. After widowhood, I learned paper helped me breathe when voices tangled and expectations. A list steadies me. A copy keeps rooms honest when memories tilt sideways. Lila arrived in my life through choir, all brightness, jokes, confetti, and favors. She loved attention the way cats love sun, sprawling without apology most afternoons. I mistook generosity for friendship and boundaries for unkindness far too long earlier. When Thomas proposed, she hugged hard, then picked colors before I answered gently. He wanted simple vows, potluck desserts, and an afternoon sun across drapes glowing. I pictured steady Sundays, calendars, shared bills filed, and porch rain welcomed inside. Instead, rehearsal revealed a pattern I must have refused before noticing too often. Her hand on his tie repeated across hours like a misplaced rehearsal cue. His silence performed agreement while he insisted nothing had truly happened here yet. I trust dates, names, and the way receipts remember their traveling companions faithfully. So I photographed only the previews, not content, because restraint serves better here. The screen captured his name, a timestamp, and the narrowed notification bar twice. I saved those to a folder named Simply, then set the phone down. I breathed with the coffee percolator steady bubbles that reorganized thought for me. Morning errands helped confirm flowers, reprint programs, check seating for elders, comfort tomorrow. I called my neighbor, a notary, about garden tomatoes and her schedule tomorrow. She said she'd be home preparing jam. Afternoons were quiet for signatures anyway. I thanked her, kept conversation ordinary, and wrote her availability discreetly inside cover. At rehearsal, the pastor's wife carried calm like an usher carries light nightly. She knows rooms where breath gathers, where words land, and where eyes avoid. I asked only logistics, not gossip, because dignity prefers quiet instructions and timing. We discussed chairs for walkers, extra water, and a basket for tissues nearby. She marked him pages, then pressed my hand and returned to counting gently. I considered calling off everything, folding decorations back into their boxes before lunch. The thought passed, replaced by something sturdier than anger or embarrassment, measured patience. I would not stage a scene that swallowed the point beneath noise again. Quiet choices travel farther, especially when they ride on paper, not volume alone. I ironed my blue dress, not white, and checked the hem for fray. Buttons held, seams held. I felt the fabric cool beneath steam this morning. Sun drifted across the dining table and dust performed slow, forgiving ballets above. I thought of my first husband and the way endings teach beginnings gently. Grief taught me steadiness. Paperwork taught me courage that doesn't sound loud anymore. Thomas brought companionship, laughter, and a hopeful list of shared repairs and picnics. He wobbled under pressure the way folding chairs wobble on uneven floors sometimes. I believed marriage could strengthen spines, but it cannot replace them for anyone. At noon I bought sandwiches and left extras for the Altar Guild volunteers. The grocery neon buzzed, blinking tired letters, and the air smelled oranges freshly. I added oatmeal cookies because elders measure kindness with small sweetnesses during gatherings. When I returned, the hall felt cooler, as if clouds gathered above somewhere. The coordinator asked about petals. I nodded and offered ribbon pins for extras. Pastor's wife checked microphones, then wiped the lectern with patient circles until gleaming. I printed one additional program, then tucked it inside my purse for safekeeping. If tempers flared, I would have enough copies to steady listening for everyone. I checked my phone settings, disabling previews, then enabled timestamped screenshots for evidence. I dislike games, but I understand how dates speak under fluorescent light clearly. My ring sat cool, reminding me love should make room for truth first. Noisy love often asks silence from others. Quiet love invites witnesses to stay. I sketched tomorrow's order on an index card, marking breathing spaces for clarity. Walk aisle, pause, turn left. Remember names, remember water. Respect edges and elders. I wrote 3 rules beneath, plain enough to carry in pockets all day. No yelling. Paper first. Witness present if terms are discussed at any time. I packed tissues, pens, and a small stapler for returning copies when needed. I brought mints because sweetness helps hard sentences travel to ears without splinters. Afternoon light shaped long bars across pews. Dust hung like gentle theater curtains. I rehearsed lines that weren't speeches, only clear sentences with boundaries and requests. I would ask for honesty, apology, and written terms if trust continued cautiously. I would not blame nor catalog years nor parade humiliations like trophies tonight. Dinner plates clinked in the kitchen and silverware chimed faint acknowledgments from volunteers. I filled the water carafes and set chairs for slower walkers near aisles. Someone laughed by the door's small ripples that ended before reaching me kindly. My patience held the way thread holds when you guide the needle slowly. I pictured tomorrow's faces, each carrying private storms behind practiced smiles and histories. I wanted peace more than celebration. Peace lasts longer than confetti and applause. Yet peace leans on truth, or it tips like unbalanced pews during storms. I placed extra pens at the lectern and a folder beneath for papers. Inside sat copies of tomorrow's program and one blank-lined page for statements. I am not a lawyer, but I understand signatures keep arguments shorter afterward. Evening crept along the windows, bringing a softer version of everything before rehearsal. I walked the aisle alone once more, measuring steps against breath and purpose. The mantel clock answered, patient, sure, and unwilling to rush anyone this evening. I slid the rehearsal card into my purse and steadied my shoulders gently. Friday at 7 would decide the room, not our scattered whispers or nerves. Before the vows, I would bring a witness and keep the paper first. The rehearsal dinner took place in the church hall, tables dressed with borrowed linens and vases of flowers from the florist's afternoon cuttings. The air smelled of roast chicken and buttered rolls, comfort food to keep nerves away. Folding chairs creaked beneath guests leaning closer for gossip, and the coffee percolator carried a steady breath from the corner table. Lila made her entrance in white again, not cream, not ivory, but the same unashamed white she had worn to rehearsal. Her smile landed before she spoke, gathering eyes like a magnet gathers pins. She touched Thomas's arm as if the chair belonged to them both. He shifted slightly, not away, just enough to look undecided. My seat was across the table, though every instinct told me to stand near. Neighbors and choir friends filled the room with chatter. The pastor's wife passed bread baskets and tried to stretch conversation toward safe ground, asking about gardens and fall schedules. Still, I felt the line where Lila angled herself into light that was not hers. Each time Thomas glanced her way, she offered some correction: his tie, his glass, even the hymn book he wasn't holding. I kept my napkin folded tight in my lap. I reminded myself, proof later, not argument now. Words said tonight might scatter. Paper holds steadier than voices. Still, my chest tightened each time she bent to whisper, and then straightened with a laugh too sharp for fellowship. "Thomas, you forgot her water," Lila said brightly, nudging his arm with hers. He startled, then lifted the pitcher toward me. "Sorry," Evelyn distracted. "I'm not thirsty," I said, calm enough to sound like choice. He poured anyway, filling the glass, insisting on small service that felt larger than it should. My hand stayed still beside the napkin, not lifting the drink. Guests clapped softly as dessert trays arrived. Lila leaned into the applause as if it belonged to her gown. "I can cut the pie," she said, rising quickly. The coordinator handed her the knife without pause. She carved generous slices and delivered them, starting with Thomas. When she reached me, she tilted her head like a child performing helpfulness. "Big piece, Evelyn, you deserve it." "I'll take what's given," I answered. The plate landed heavy before me, crust crumbling, filling sliding toward the rim. She returned to Thomas's side with her fork already in hand. Conversations resumed, stories from choir practice, garden pests, grandchildren's milestones. Yet the undertone shifted, glances at me, then toward Lila, back to me again. I heard one woman whisper, "Strange color for a rehearsal." Another replied, "Some people can't stand shadows." I dabbed my lips with the napkin and placed it folded on the plate. My fingers found the edge of the program tucked into my purse. Inside, the rehearsal card waited with names and seating written in her familiar loops. A second phone still glimmered in my memory, tucked into her clutch like a secret she dared me to acknowledge. I chose silence, at least until the room called for grace before departure. Yet silence did not erase the sting. I looked at Thomas. His shoulders sagged under jokes he pretended not to hear. He raised his glass too quickly when someone toasted the couple. "To new beginnings," he said, but his eyes traveled elsewhere. The pastor's wife caught my gaze from across the table. She touched her temple lightly, a quiet reminder to breathe. I exhaled and let the mantel clock at the end of the hall carry the rhythm for me. Tick, steady, pause, tick again. Church hall, fluorescent lights trembling above mismatched centerpieces. I laid my fork across the plate with deliberate care. If I spoke rashly, whispers would multiply faster than proofs. My spine stiffened, my jaw softened enough to hold words still. "Not tonight," I said quietly, voice steady enough for only myself. The dinner wound toward its close with hymns hummed under breath, chairs scraping, coats gathered. I stayed seated until others moved toward the door, letting voices drift past. Lila walked close to Thomas, speaking of schedules, flowers, and photographs. She never mentioned vows, never once turned her eyes toward me with respect. When finally she leaned too near, whispering again about place cards and better angles, I spoke just loud enough for those at the table to hear. "I hope the lights tomorrow show what's true." My tone remained measured, but a few heads turned. "Evelyn," Thomas said quickly, a shade too sharp, "you're imagining things." The words landed heavier than pie crust, heavier than laughter. Gaslighting sounds like calm correction to those not inside the storm. Around me chatter resumed, but a crack had already shown. Some faces looked away, others pretended deafness. Only the pastor's wife paused, her lips pressing together before she resumed stacking hymnals. I rose, adjusted my shawl, and thanked the coordinator for her care. "Everything looks fine," I said, because reassurance keeps wheels turning. She nodded, relieved, and busied herself with folding linen napkins into neat triangles. Outside, porch rain met the steps, tapping an evening rhythm. The air smelled of damp wood, sharp and honest compared to the perfume inside. I lingered beneath the awning until the crowd dispersed, then walked home with the steady sound of drops marking time. Not victory, not yet. Only patience, paper and dates waiting for their hour. The morning after rehearsal dinner, the house felt larger than it was. Rain had passed, leaving air heavy with damp wood and fresh earth. I listened to the fridge hum while the mantel clock kept its stubborn rhythm. Both sounds anchored me when my mind kept circling the same questions. Was I overreacting? Was jealousy making me see whispers where none existed? I had lived long enough to mistrust my own certainty sometimes. A second marriage should not begin with suspicion thick as storm clouds. Thomas had laughed, then scolded softly, calling me tired. Maybe he was right. Maybe grief had sharpened me into a woman too quick to imagine betrayal. I opened the folded rehearsal card, tracing Lila's handwriting. Even loops, confident strokes, names placed where she thought they belonged. The pie plate from last night sat rinsed but still sticky at the edge. I touched it and felt the faint roughness of sugar across porcelain. That grit felt like my doubts, small, clinging, not easily rinsed away. I carried laundry to the machine and listened to the water rush inside. The sound steadied me, yet questions pressed harder. If I spoke too soon, I could ruin more than vows. If I stayed silent, I could lose the only piece left. I folded towels, corners, lined edges, crisped my hands, practicing control. but my chest still tightened each time I pictured her white dress brushing his sleeve. Doubt felt like a second shadow following me through the house. By noon I stepped outside. The porch boards were damp, releasing the sharp smell of wet pine. Neighbors passed with umbrellas folded under arms. One waved and I waved back, smile steady though my stomach nodded. I needed an ally who understood room's timing and order. The pastor's wife had always carried calm into loud spaces. She arranged hymns, counted candles, and could silence a row of restless children with nothing more than patience. If truth landed tomorrow, I would need her help. I called and asked if she could spare 10 minutes. Her voice, steady as always, invited me to the church kitchen. When I arrived, she was cutting lemon bars, the air thick with sugar and citrus. I wanted to ask a favor, I said. Her eyes lifted, kind, not rushing me. I may need the room held tomorrow, I explained. Not a spectacle, just steady order if conversation grows too heavy. She set the knife down and wiped her hands carefully. Evelyn, of course, she said. You don't need to tell me details. I'll be there. Relief slid through me like warm water. I hadn't realized how tightly I had been holding my breath. The smell of lemon and sugar clung to my hands even after I washed them. It felt like permission to believe someone would stand steady beside me. Still, calm is stronger with paper. Paper doesn't flinch, doesn't misremember, doesn't bend when voices press against it. For that I turned to my neighbor, a retired notary. I stopped by her porch in the afternoon. She sat with a basket of green beans, snapping ends into a bowl. The porch smelled of sun-dried wood and the faint tang of canning jars. I may need a witness tomorrow, I said quietly. Not for drama, only for clarity if promises turn into terms. She nodded, unshaken. Afternoon works best, she replied. I'll be home at 2, papers ready if needed. I thanked her and she patted my arm. Peace favors preparation, Evelyn. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Her words stayed with me as I walked home. Preparation is not suspicion, it is care for tomorrow. The air vent whirred inside as I returned, cooling the hallway. I pressed my hand against the wall and promised myself I would not waver. Evening came quietly. I brewed coffee, its scent rising strong enough to fill the kitchen. I sipped and tasted steadiness, though my stomach still twisted at intervals. Thomas moved through the living room, humming hymns. He asked nothing about my day. He kissed my forehead as if habit alone carried him through. I watched him walk past and wondered how many habits cover what we choose not to say. I spread papers across the table, not to trap him but to steady myself. Receipts, the rehearsal card, the screenshots of previews with time stamps. Each item spoke in quiet language, dates, names, sequence. Nothing shouted, yet nothing could be dismissed. I slid them into a plain folder. On top I wrote tomorrow's date in neat block letters. I told myself I would not open it unless needed. But knowing it was ready let me breathe easier. The house ticked with the mantel clock and rain began again outside. Each drop on the porch rail sounded like a count, steady and unavoidable. I leaned back listening and allowed myself to rest. Doubt still whispered, but preparation whispered louder. I knew who would stand beside me. I knew where the folder would wait. And I knew what hour had been chosen. Friday at 2 the witness would be present. The truth would not need to shout. I woke with the sound of the fridge humming steady as a metronome. The house smelled faintly of rain-soaked wood and the bitter trace of coffee left from last night. Morning light reached across the drapes, slow and cautious, as if it knew today mattered. I spread papers across the dining table, stacking them in tidy rows. No speeches, no drama, only proof lined where eyes could see if needed. The first folder held screenshots. Not content, only previews, Thomas's name at the top, Lila's message below, time-stamped clean as a courthouse record. One at 9:30, another at midnight, a third just before rehearsal. Timestamps never blush, never excuse themselves, never laugh too brightly at dinner. I printed them, trimmed edges square, and placed them into a plastic sleeve. The air vent whirred softly above me. I exhaled with its rhythm steadying my pulse. Next I opened the florist's email. Charges split on 2 cards, mine and one I did not recognize. The receipt showed delivery of an extra bouquet, same address, same day. Flowers meant for who? The note field carried no names, but the math carried enough weight. I slid the printout beneath the screenshots. I brewed fresh coffee, the percolator bubbling like a companion who never lied. The smell filled the kitchen, grounding me. I drank slowly, letting the warmth reach places doubt had stiffened. On my phone, the rideshare app revealed another truth. A receipt logged to Thomas's account, destination, her street, her number visible. I remembered that evening he claimed choir practice had run late. The driver's name and the timestamp said otherwise. I printed it and added it to the folder. The mantel clock ticked, a quiet guardian keeping me from rushing. I gathered the rehearsal card, her handwriting looping boldly, placing herself where she pleased. It was small, almost petty, yet it spoke louder than apologies whispered at midnight. I placed it carefully atop the growing stack. Then came the program copy I had tucked away. Inside, my notes, rules scribbled firm. No yelling. Paper first. Witness present. I slid that program beside the other papers, a reminder to myself as much as to anyone else. I paused, listening. The house was still except for the porch rain beginning again, tapping like deliberate fingers against the rail. I leaned into the sound, grateful. I opened a drawer and pulled out pens, each one tested until the ink ran clear. A stapler, tape, paper clips, all small guardians. People imagine strength as loud voices or slammed doors. I know better. Strength hides in preparation, in dates, in edges pressed flat. The grocery list caught my eye. I added mints and tissues because even truth speaks easier with courtesy at hand. I pictured tomorrow, the church hall smelling of coffee and Lysol, the air vent humming, chairs angled toward the aisle. I pictured myself laying 3 papers flat, saying little, letting silence finish sentences. Thomas wandered into the room. Up early again, he said, scratching his head. Yes, I answered, calm and simple. Couldn't sleep, he asked. I slept enough, I replied, not looking away from the folder. He poured coffee, humming the same hymn he had last night. Don't work yourself up, he added. I'm not working myself up, I said. I'm working with paper. He frowned as if unsure what that meant. Then he sipped, said nothing more, and walked back into the living room. I added one last sheet, a blank page lined carefully. For signatures, for terms, for whatever tomorrow required. It sat at the back like a door waiting to be opened. I closed the folder and pressed my palm against it. Cool plastic beneath my hand, a steadier feeling than hope alone. I whispered to myself, this will be enough. Later, I walked to the market. The grocery neon buzzed overhead, letters flickering tiredly. I bought mints, tissues, and extra pens, slipping them into my bag. People shuffled around me, carrying bread and fruit, unaware that I was building a quiet arsenal of truth. Back home, I lined everything on the dining table once more. Screenshots, florist receipt, rideshare log, rehearsal card, program copy, blank page. Each proof stood like a witness waiting for its turn. Each one whispered the same message, you are not imagining this. I folded them back into the folder, slid it into my purse, and zipped it shut. The zipper sound was louder than it should have been, like a lock closing. The air smelled of rain again, sharp against the drapes. I drew them open, letting light flood the room, and stood taller. Tomorrow, if voices tried to twist, if laughter tried to mask, I would have enough. I would not shout. I would not crumble. I would only slide the papers across one at a time until silence learned to listen. Evening settled, the mantel clock ticking softer under the hum of the air vent. I lit a candle at the table, not for drama but for steadiness. The flame flickered against the folder's edge, reminding me of fragility and strength together. I thought of my first husband, of how his absence had taught me to live with gaps. Paper had never filled those gaps, but it had kept others from widening them further. Now once more I leaned on paper, not to end love but to give it the only chance left. I set the candle out, smoothed the tablecloth, and whispered one last vow to myself. No yelling. Paper first. Witness present. The fridge hummed, the porch rain tapped, and the night held me steady. Saturday morning carried a nervous stillness. The porch rain had slowed, leaving the air damp with quiet. The mantel clock ticked through the silence, each second sharper than the last. I dressed slowly, smoothing the fabric of my blue dress. It felt steady under my hand, unlike the twisting of my stomach. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, its scent rising with a warmth I needed. I poured 1 cup and held it between my palms until the heat spread. By the time I reached the church, the air smelled of Lysol and old hymnals. The fellowship hall buzzed with voices, guests arranging themselves, the faint whir of the air vent overhead. The pastor's wife moved quietly among the tables, touching shoulders, guiding greetings, setting rhythm. Her glance toward me was brief but steady, she was ready. I slipped into the side room near the sanctuary, folder in hand. The walls were pale, the carpet faintly stained by years of choir shoes. The hum of the vent reached even here, steady like a reminder. I placed the folder on the table and waited. Thomas entered first, adjusting his tie as if it were armor. His face carried the strain of a man juggling excuses he hadn't rehearsed well. Behind him came Lila, her dress once again too white, her smile brittle at the edges. She carried her clutch close as though it were more than an accessory. "Why here?" Thomas asked. "Because before Vows will speak plainly," I answered. Lila shifted, pressing her lips together but saying nothing yet. I opened the folder slowly. Inside lay the printed screenshots, the florist receipt, the rideshare log, and the rehearsal card. I lifted the first page and set it in the center of the table. Names, times, previews, black ink that didn't tremble the way voices could. Thomas frowned, leaning forward. "This isn't fair, Evelyn," he said. "It's stress. Weddings do strange things." "It's not stress," I said quietly. "It's time. Time doesn't lie." Lila's eyes filled quickly. She dabbed at them with a tissue she had pulled too quickly from her clutch. "I never meant," she began, then stopped, unable to finish. I laid the florist receipt beside the first page. "2 cards, 2 charges, 1 bouquet extra," I said. Thomas looked at the floor, his hand tightening on his tie. The rideshare log came next. Driver's name, timestamp, address. Lila pressed her hands together in her lap, trembling. Thomas sighed heavily, muttering, "It was one ride. It meant nothing, but paper does not care about meaning. Paper only carries fact."